Whoopsie, don't have my boy with me here. DJ Anubis, here with you on the Military Radio Podcast. Yes, I've done this before. Just doesn't look like it. With me today, the Professor Daniel Miller. Thank you, sir, for being here on this special edition of the Kaiju Spotlight, where we get to talk a little bit about Varan, which is one of your favorite kaiju. I found out, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, see, look at the shirt there. Show that shit off.
Yep.
There you go. But that's, kind of the problem, too. Sometimes when I'm putting together these intros, there's very little to go on. He has one movie, basically, and then couple of, cameos, basically. But other than that, not much to go on in terms of films. Now, I just got done watching it again for the second time ever. And I think both times I've watched it are English versions. But you say there's another version, what's the Japanese version. So, before we get into that, let me just kind of give people an idea. Varan is a triamphibian kaiju who first appeared in the 1958 Toho film Varan. Is it the Unbeatable?
The Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. I always get that confused with Invincible. It might as well be both. But
yeah,
later debuted in the Godzilla series in 1968 film Destroy All Monsters, and I think he made some appearances in some video games and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting because in video games, they tend to give him a little more powers than he has in the actual film. So let me know when was the first time you saw this film and what the differences are between both Blu-ray or DVD. I know you got them both there. So
yeah, the first time I saw this movie was the truncated American version, which, looking back at it now, that's the poster for the American cut. Looking back at it now, I fail to realize just how much of a chore it is to sit through from beginning to end. And it's like, hold on, this is a kaiju movie. A kaiju movie shouldn't be a chore to sit through. What happened? Then I did some looking into it, and I found out that the original Japanese version is regarded as a far more superior movie. But by this time, I was trying to find a copy of it on DVD. It had gone out of circulation. So prior to Christmas, just before the pandemic, actually, I got lucky when the Japanese version arrived, wrapped up under the tree.
Better cover, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there we are.
Night and day, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Now, some of the special effects footage between the two versions, it is the same, but the American version has this cropped pan and scan effect, whereas the original Japanese version was a full widescreen presentation. An interesting little side note between the two versions visually. But yeah, seeing the Japanese version, it presents a much clearer idea as to what the filmmakers were trying to achieve. That, and there's an even more complex history behind the movie itself. Originally, it was meant to be a co-production between ABPT Pictures and Toho. Now, if that name sounds familiar, ABPT, it should, because they were also behind the original American version for Godzilla Raids Again, dubbed The Volcano Monsters, in which the Godzilla and Anguirus suits would be reused with new scenes shot with them, cut in with the original special effects footage. But then that company went bust, and all the projects, including Volcano Monsters and the Varan TV series, never happened. So Toho, they were stuck with material that they had already filmed, so they decided to take what was already there and very quickly, and it shows that it was rushed in some places. They turned it into a movie to remake some of the money that had already been spent.
Now, with that, because like watching the American version, there's a few things that like the main character, the main American guy, like he's highly annoying when it comes to his wife. Like he's always
Yeah.
like treating her like ass. Now, granted, it's the times, and that's kind of like how those guys were back then. But
Mm.
does the Japanese like it just seemed like it relied too much on one, her being like the girl damsel in distress, and then also him just kind of like get back in the kitchen type stuff. Does the Japan version like vary in terms of how they present like the dialogue and the script? Like, is it more centered on the kaiju, or is it still the same?
Yeah, the dialogue and also the storyline itself is drastically different from the American version. In fact, if you've seen both versions, then you realize the plot of the Japanese version is actually put very much into the background and off to the side, because the characters do appear in stock footage with no dubbing accompanying them, but they're basically just thrown as like little footnotes by the main character, played by Miron Hilly in the American version. The
Hmm.
Japanese version, the dialogue is also drastically different, and also the storyline itself, which relates a lot to the dialogue. The storyline is that two university students are on an expedition to a place in Japan which is called the Tibet of Japan because of how unusual it is environment wise. And there's a rare species of butterfly which can only be found in Siberia, but it's somehow appeared in that region in Japan. So two students go off trying to find a specimen and they're killed during a landslide, which the locals in the area believe is the work of their god Baradagi Sanjin, which is
Hmm.
a full name for it. So the three main characters who we follow in the film, they go there to investigate the deaths, and as they press further into the Forbidden Zone, a place that the locals have cornered off and worship the Baradagi Sanjin, the actual kaiju itself emerges from a lake, which, if you watch the Japanese version, Akira Ifukube's soundtrack with Varan's first appearance is a wonderful, perfectly shot uh, special effects sequence. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend it absolutely.
So is the because like I said, I've never seen the Japanese version. Is the
Mm.
American from the American version in the Japanese, or was he added?
No, he was added. It's effectively the same way Raymond Burr was added in Godzilla King of the
Gotcha.
Monsters.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
because
yeah,
he's actually
mm,
highly annoying. Like I'd rather see the Japanese version.
yeah,
Like at least with Raymond Burr was like sort of subtle at times, but this
yeah,
guy, he's like full frontal in everything that's going on.
yeah,
So I'm just like, dude, I'm really annoyed by this guy a lot.
yeah. For that you'd have to thank the who does the script for this? Oh yeah, Sid Harris. Well, yeah, you have
Yes.
to thank Sid Harris for that one because my God, that was schlock.
Yeah, I was like, because I mean, I probably should have known there would be like an original Japanese version, but usually they're not straying too far. So even like the original 54 Godzilla, like at least the story's still somewhat structured properly. It just
Yeah,
has Ray popping up. This one, I didn't realize like he's like a whole new thing, but this dude's like becomes this front and center of everything that's going on. And I'm like, how do we even allow this? This guy's a dickhead. I don't even like this dude.
no, no,
So
mm,
yeah, so
uh,
it's said that Varan is like kind of a cross between a squirrel or a sugar glider, but he actually looks more like an iguana,
yeah,
especially when he's running all fours. What
yeah.
do you know about his origins, basically, as a creature? Like, do we have any like background on like what he is exactly?
Yeah, the Japanese version does shed some background on one of his origins. Uh, the origin in the Japanese version that he's a prehistoric descendant of the reptile Varanus pater or a varanapod, which lived around the Cretaceous era, but has somehow undergone this evolution into a giant kaiju. In other mediums, it may vary. I'm not exactly sure because I know that Varan does appear in the comics, Godzilla Rulers of Earth, and was also brought back in the video games, Godzilla Monster of Monsters and Godzilla Unleashed. But yeah, what I know primarily is from the Japanese version of the original film.
So the one thing about obviously with Varan is that they made one movie with him, and the funny thing is, like much like Gorosaurus and some of the other ones that just kind of initially had like Gorosaurus, like I think was more like a cameo at first with Kong, and then all of a sudden
Yeah,
ends up showing up later, even more so than Varan, which is kind of funny.
yeah,
Uh why do you think it is they never did any more with Varan? Like to me, he's kind of more interesting than Gorosaurus, and I'm not trying to diss Gorosaurus at all, but just in terms of looks and possibilities, like because even in the Varan film, and we'll get into this later a little bit about
yeah.
what he can do as like special attacks or anything. He just looks like he has a lot more possibilities. So why do you think that it's been like just never redone, or why he hasn't even come back up into other films like on a major scale?
Yeah. I think that the big reason would probably be from a business perspective, because when Toho, this was going to 2001 when GMK was entering production, Toho held a vote of which kaiju to bring in, and Varan was one of the options. But it turns out that Mothra and King Ghidorah were more popular since they had more exposure in the Godzilla franchise. But the
Yeah,
filmmakers did actually incorporate elements of Varan's design, namely these frills on the side of the neck here, into the Ghidorah design in GMK. But there is another reason why Varan, although he was in Destroy All Monsters as a cameo, he wasn't in terms of a costumed performance. The answer is two things: the practicality and also the budget. The original Varan suit by this time had been lying idle in the Toho studios, so much that it actually started falling to pieces. And even though the production team tried to restore the suit as best as they could for principal photography, it just wasn't working. So all of Varan's scenes were reduced to the miniature flying puppet that we see in the final cut of the movie.
yeah, it's kind of like I was here. We go. We're just gonna throw in this little flying thing in the background.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's always been like, come on, guys, you can do a little more with that. Really, come on.
Yeah. I mean, but seriously, it would have been awesome if he showed up more. Like if he had his own sequence, say for instance, if he just appeared in Nevada or whatever and just tore through a small town there, or if he were near the Amazon rainforest and just emerged out there and just caused chaos. That would be brilliant. But yeah, I think why Varan often gets overlooked is essentially because of the how the first movie itself critically was received and how it's
Yeah,
sort of just been put into the background. But I think now, namely with thanks to Bandai actually making a figure of him, Varan is somewhat coming into the foreground more, and rightfully so, has garnered a bit more of his own following and more of a reputation as sort of underutilized kaiju.
Do you think with saying that, do you think that it's a possibility that we could see him either in the MonsterVerse or maybe in Toho's like -1 series, or do you think it's just too far of a possibility?
Yeah. I really want to hope that at some point in the future, Varan actually gets a proper comeback. If not, I wouldn't have it in a sequel to -1, because -1, I love that movie, and I don't want to put too much of what I want to see out there in case it either happens to be true or it just somewhat undermines the first movie.
Right.
So I'll leave the -1 sequel alone. In terms of getting its own remake or in terms of the MonsterVerse, then yes, absolutely. Varan has to come back. I mean, his only appearance was back in 1958 in his own movie, and then 10 years later with cameos in Destroy All Monsters. But he did make another cameo of sorts in the anime Godzilla Singular Point when his design was incorporated into one of Godzilla's forms as he evolves throughout the series. So yeah, although he's not been completely idle, at least on his own, elements of him have been used for like Ghidorah in GMK and Godzilla in Godzilla Singular Point. But I think it is time and very much overdue that Varan makes a return.
Yeah, and I think that again, he has the ability to have things added. So I know, like throughout some of these games and some of these animations, that they give him a little bit more stuff. But
Yeah,
I think about like his horns on his back. Like you could almost do something like with Baragon, where you had the Rainbow of Death. Like he could have something similar where they would glow and do something. But in the movie, we just never got to see anything like that. He was just kind of stomping around and
yeah,
flying at times. That was about it. If he comes back in the Monsterverse, I would like to see him get a little bit more. Like some say, he has like in the animations, like heat rays or something, just
yeah,
anything, because he has like that look. That's a possibility to do a lot of different things.
absolutely. I mean, in Godzilla Unleashed, he's actually given his own radioactive breath, and he also has a special attack where he, I don't know if it's a forward flip or a backward flip, but he actually uses his spikes on the back against his opponents. In terms of what Varan could do with his membranes that comes out between his hands and legs, as well as using that for gliding, I'd also think that would work great as an intimidation display when he's facing off another kaiju. Like he makes himself bigger than he really is. Because there are,
Yeah,
yeah, because there are in places like Australia, there are thrill lizards, lizards with thrills on them, and what they do is that they flush blood into the thrills and actually make them make themselves appear much bigger than they are. So they have this sort of display of like back up or it's going to get messy, that kind of thing.
yeah. It reminded me a lot of the dinosaur in Jurassic Park, that it had
Yeah, yeah,
the
the Dilophosaur.
intimidation factor.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think they also mentioned in either Unleashed or something like that, that his horns were like almost sometimes poison darts too. So you had that kind of aspect as a defensive mechanism.
mm,
So I mean, there's so much you can do with him that would be kind of cool. It just sucks that no one's really taken the chance to bring back some of these more isolated kaiju. And
absolutely.
I can't imagine that Toho would charge a lot to use his form either, because if they're not doing anything with it, it's like, yeah, well, we'll give you a discount here. You take them for half a mil, you know
Yeah,
what I'm saying? So it'd be nice just to see someone say, take a chance on this. But, it's hard to say, man, because we always talk about it when it comes to the Monsterverse and in general, that like we as fans seem to be the bigger fans of the franchise than even Dory or anybody else, even though they're fans. They might just go to a certain point. We never give up on the kaiju fandom, so we're always there, and
yeah,
we're always like, let's do this. You got to do this. No, you got to bring this guy in. It's like, but yeah, no one does that.
yeah. That's true. In fact, one interesting feature that I felt in the Japanese version, which I felt could have been expanded a bit more, and this is also hinted at in the American version. There are the locals who worship Varan as a god. And I
Yep.
feel that if they were to remake the original Varan with, they would just play a bit more into the Aboriginal sacrifice elements, almost akin to how the natives on Skull Island in the original King Kong practice human sacrifice to appease Kong. That it could be the similar sort of nature with Varan, because he does have that sort of characteristics in his design as like a god who is uh, is full of wrath and anger if he's not placated in some way.
Dude, you brought up a really good point. Because it just dawned on me. So in the past, some of my other specials I've been doing,
Mhm.
Neko initially wanted it like much like a lot of us. She wants like a MonsterVerse origin story for Rodan and Mothra. But
Yeah.
the way she described about Rodan, because he is a fire demon, it would be set in the time of like the Aztecs and stuff with their pyramids and stuff like that,
Mm.
or their like buildings that they had. And you know, I was always trying to think of like what creature would Rodan be fighting against. It'd obviously be like the smaller, like insectoid type things, but Varan would be an excellent opponent because you like you said, it has his own like worshippers of what he is as a god. So Rodan had the same thing. That's what they kept talking about in the King of the Monsters.
Yeah.
So in fact that Varan can also fly, at least glide, that gives him a same type of fighting chance against Rodan in the air. So
Yeah.
what do you think about that? That I never thought about. Usually, I'm like throwing in Angarius as like the opponent, but Varan actually makes a lot more sense in that regard.
I would agree, especially if he were to fight against Rodan, because it would be it's going to be like a kaiju dogfight, similar to Rodan fighting Ghidorah in King of the Monsters, but with against Varan, it's not going to be this big, powerful Goliath from outer space. It's going to be this other behemoth that's very much been in the shadows on the same planet that Rodan's been living on, but it's a lot more ferocious and it's a lot more. I think it would say, Varan, I think, would actually be the underdog of the fight, similar to how Anguirus is the underdog in Godzilla versus Gigan. How
Right.
after he keeps on getting slashed up by Gigan, he keeps on going in for the fight. I see the same thing in Varan, if I'm being honest, because yeah, I mean, he might against Rodan, he might get his eyes pecked out or something, or he might get blown over by Rodan's wind gusts. But Varan, with the possible intimidation display that he could do, he can definitely hold his own in a fight against Rodan.
Yeah, and Rodan's already kind of like not really an Earth defender, so he's pretty much an evil version of Rodan. So
Mm,
making Varan more of a human friendly Earth defender would be kind of a good approach, and he would be tenacious and a protector of sorts.
yeah,
So that would be very cool to see. Like I didn't even really think about him too much, but after watching everything and his abilities and stuff, it makes a lot of sense why you would pit them against together. Because usually you're like, well, who do you gonna have fighting Rodan? I mean, Mothra, obviously, but we've already kind of seen that, in the
yeah,
King of the Monsters. So let's go back to a little bit more archaic times, and we'll see two creatures that, even though we know Rodan, we don't know much about Varan, but that would be a cool way to reintroduce him into the kaiju world
mm,
as an Earth defender. So that'd be a lot of fun, I think.
yeah. And you also mentioned about the worshippers of Rodan being more of the along the lines of the Aztecs, and then I mentioned the tribal sacrificial relationship, I guess you could say, between the locals and Varan. Could you actually see uh, that sort of thing being done if they were to remake Varan, if whether it be in its own movie or even in the MonsterVerse? I
Yep.
mean, what do you think? I mean, is that feasible?
Definitely. I mean, the first thing I think about too, because of the Aztecs, I don't know if you ever saw Apocalypto by
Yeah,
Mel Gibson.
yeah.
They were doing some heinous, crazy shit. Uh,
Oh, absolutely.
so, what if you took the Aztecs tribe, that the more serious and vicious version of it, and then used them to go after Varan's followers, trying to sacrifice them, and that's how Varan has to come awaken and basically take care of business because the Aztecs are trying to sacrifice to worship Rodan.
Hmm.
So that would totally be a great setup. I mean,
Yeah.
you'd have to kind of water it down compared to Apocalypto. You don't want quite that much gore in a
Yeah.
movie that's
That's
meant for
true.
kids and young adults, but
Yeah, but that
it'd still be
works.
a lot of fun, you know?
Yeah, but that also works because that gives a very valid reason for the two kaiju having conflict in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And it's interesting too. This is side of that is like, you know, with Varan, that movie that I watched, and I'm assuming the Japanese is kind of close to that, is that well, you actually said it was a little bit different in setup, but in the English version, from what I watched, the whole idea is again is this American dickhead comes over and he's blowing up the lake and he's trying to test shit in the water that's toxic to humans, which he's like keeping the tribesmen away, but it's killing fish, which basically awakens Varan anyway. Throughout the entire film, like even though the tribe and the rumors about Varan existing because of the worshiping and stuff, it's like the entire movie we spend, it's like we're gonna destroy a creature that we were done pissing in his pool
Yeah,
and pissed him off to begin with. So now we're just trying to like finish the job. Like it's all how monster movies go, but it kind of irks me just the way it's presented in my version.
yeah.
So I don't know how much of it's accurate to the Japanese, but it just pisses me off.
In fact, I'll tell you this: the whole chemical experiment subplot, the footage you see there, that's actually from the halfway point in the movie where the authorities, after we first see Varan, they know of Varan's existence and they try to drive him out of the lake using chemical missiles, which basically paralyze uh, life under the water. So there's not so much this dicetylene experiment that the American cut presents it. It's really more of a drawing out tactic.
Yeah, yeah. So if they did do another Varan, let's say to just remake the one that was made, or if we see him in another part of the MonsterVerse or whatever, what would you like to see in terms of his look, his powers? If you didn't do a Rodan origin story, how would you like his story to be involved with the MonsterVerse?
Now, for the MonsterVerse, I would very much like. I mean, if they were allowed to, if they got the rights to, I would like the design to be close, if not pretty faithful to the original design, because just this design alone, it's unique and distinctive in such a way. It's also compared to like Godzilla and all the others, it's also a very simplistic design and it works. I also, what I want to see story wise is I want to have a bit of backstory to Varan in the MonsterVerse. I want to see this isolated this isolated civilization revering Varan as this god, this deity who they have to appease human sacrifice to just to prevent it from getting angry. And of course, Monarch or whatever organization interferes and all that, and they basically piss off Varan, and we have the destruction scenes that if you saw the original version, the special effects sequences, the destruction of the village and Haneda Airport in the original, they're brilliant special effects sequences. And with Varan being vengeful and enraged, his destruction could be just, if not on the same level, if not just a little bit more aggressive than that of Godzilla's, because he's basically crash through a few buildings and use atomic breath to start a fire. Varan, he's just basically tearing things apart and diving head first and just ripping things to pieces.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And actually, you made another good point about him because of his being worshipped as a god. It's a lot different than Godzilla or I mean, Mothra is kind of worshipped in that way, but you know,
Mm,
we don't know much about Rodan's backstory right now in terms of the MonsterVerse. But the one thing I did like about Godzilla versus X versus Kong was that Shimu was an ancient Titan. So we're talking she's older than even Godzilla. And so
yeah,
like I really like that approach. And so I think you're right. I think no better way to reintroduce Varan than to bring him in as like an ancient Titan as well.
Yeah.
Uh, he like one of the OGs basically, and so I think that'd be really cool.
Mm.
And the plot with Monarch trying again to fuck around because, like, Monarch, we never got a chance to see them try to mess with Shima. We only know what the story with Kong and how that played out, but we don't even know if they knew much about Shima because they didn't even know about that part of the Hollow Earth. So there's so much more that hasn't been discovered.
Yeah.
Uh, it would make a great storyline for Varan to be discovered as another ancient titan. I think that'd be amazing.
Absolutely. And there's also something that we never did get the explicit answers to in King of the Monsters is how did they at least contain or in least some way monitor the Titans before the mass awakening in that movie? What if when they find this place where Varan is supposedly being worshipped by the followers, Monarch tries to do the same thing as part of their protecting and studying the Titans, but in doing so, they make a mistake, and that enrages Varan. That could trigger his awakening rather than the outsiders intruding on his territory, which would be a natural animalistic response. Because if you intrude on an animal's territory, the animal's going to know about it instinctively and it will challenge you to leave.
It's a great point. Also, like, we know that at some point, and they've been talking about it, we have one more Godzilla film. We don't know how much of it's going to be Godzilla, or if Godzilla is going to perish. We don't know, even though technically he can't because Toho won't allow it. But
Yeah.
let's say their plan is okay. If they do well at the next film, they might want to do another, but without Godzilla. Well, if you're going to keep Kong, since he is an American creature,
Mm.
Shimu is our own creation, so we can keep her.
Yeah.
They can borrow Varan because even though he's not Godzilla, he is still like a Toho Kaiju. So with utilizing Kong and Shima, like even though we can not really necessarily make Varan an evil creature, because obviously if you're the way you're describing Monarch is proking and probing a creature they know nothing about because it's so ancient. They don't even have any information on like most of the other ones, but this one's so old they really don't know anything about it. And so
Yeah.
there could be like this battle between the three of them, even though Kong is more aligned with Shimo. But just kind of, you can kind of keep going with it. It's just your stories have got to be strong.
Yeah.
Uh, you can't
The
get
characters
lazy,
as well.
right?
Mm.
So yeah, and then like I said, you still have the Monarch show. So if Kong is going to be a focus in that, you can certainly intertwine it all together.
Yes, you could.
Let's see. What else did I have to talk about? I think that's about it, really. Do you have any tidbits or trivia you know about Veron that people may not know about?
Well, I have quite a lot of those about Varan.
Good. Let's
Yeah.
hear it.
All right. So in terms of the suit, because I have the one of the special effects booklets that Toho made recently. One of the fun facts about the suit was the creating the shell along the back. Apparently, the details, all those bumps and
Yeah.
lumps in there, they were actually from peanut shells when they had uh, rubber molds casted over a discarded peanut shell. It came up with this pattern or this they had this pattern on it, and the production team thought, "Oh, that would be really good. Let's use that on the suit." And there are moments in the movie, especially if you see the Japanese version, because it's a much better quality than the American cut, which is
Right.
a downgraded pan and scan. You would notice that the lines here on the suit, where the back fits onto the rest of the body, and it's loose at some point because that's where the opening of the suit was. Originally, this was inspired as a culmination of combining elements of Godzilla and Rodan. Like there's Godzilla's strength and resilience, and there's Rodan's speed. Hence
Yeah.
the gliding ability that he does in the film. Another piece of trivia. Another piece of trivia. Trying to yes, this wasn't really expanded upon, but it is an interesting aspect of Iran that if he is brought back in the MonsterVerse or another piece of media could be expanded upon. Varan, in the final act of the movie, he's swallowing flares that are dropped by the JSSDF, and they
Yeah,
use this as an idea. It's like, what if we attach explosives to those flares because it's eating things that glow? So that's an interesting area that if you've seen Godzilla and Godzilla Raids again, then you would know that that element is carried over from those movies because Godzilla, he's angered by light in those movies because light reminds him of the nuclear explosions. What if Kaiju or Titans, if you're talking about the MonsterVerse, have an adverse reaction to light or see in different spectrums of light? And how would that play into how Monarch would attempt to contain the monsters?
yeah, that's a great idea. And I was even thinking, again, this is just off the wall, but you know, another possibility because we would consider Varan ancient Titan, even if we didn't do a mixture of Kong and Shima, or if it was just Kong. Although Kong, I don't know how far back he goes in that universe, but you know, we talked about in King of the Monsters how Ghidorah was like basically a creature from outer space. It just dropped on the
Yeah.
planet. He was not meant to be there.
He's the
It wouldn't
first
be
alien of the
yeah,
MonsterVerse.
right. So it wouldn't
Mm.
be a bad idea to even have Varan face Ghidorah. Like if you give Varan enough firepower, there's a possibility that he could hold his own at least to some degree. Even though
Yeah,
Godzilla is usually the one that comes to save the day, but that'd be kind of cool. Like I always thought that having a Ghidorah origin story would be kind of cool too, and so that would be kind of neat. You know?
yeah, yeah. I can see that happening. If not, if not in the Hollow Earth, then at least in the underground, at least in the underground chasms near the Earth's core. Because I mean, in Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, it's alluded to that Godzilla and the other Titans survived on radiation from the Earth's core. So it's
Yeah,
plausible if Varan it were to be in the Monsterverse, it would be hiding in those same cavernous areas, and that would also explain why he would have an adverse reaction to light because he's effectively been living underground for millions, if not billions, of years.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So obviously, Ishiro Honda directed Varan, and
Yeah,
you know he did Godzilla and stuff like that. But do you think Honda initially had planned on just doing like separate monster movies at some point, or because obviously Godzilla became the biggest name of all the things that he did? But
yeah,
again, I'm always kind of baffled that like obviously if we're all I can go off of is the American version, it's easy to see why they never touched him again. But if the Japanese version is so much better, you know, like we said, I'm surprised they just never did more with it. And it's kind of disappointing because you know, initially when we were doing this and I was putting together the different creatures I would be doing on spotlights, I'm like, I know the professor really loves Varan, but I can't figure out why. And so, but I watched it again. I'm like, despite the version I watched, like I said, aside from the story, the creature itself is amazing. Like I really like it a lot.
absolutely.
The movement is great. And again, like the story that I'm watching is like, you know, you're like I said, you're pissing in the guy's pool and you expect him to just take it. Like
Yeah,
he's not going to do that. He's going to come out and take care of business, and then you're trying to kill him for just doing what a creature would do, protecting its home. And that's a good story too. Like, and again, I think you and I had a lot of good ideas about what they could do with him going forward.
mm,
There's so many possibilities because he's somebody you don't have to really worry about. Like Rodan and Mothra, like you have backstories that you can build upon in the MonsterVerse, but Varan's an unknown. You can do whatever the fuck you like with him, and it doesn't matter what it is because it'd be very interesting.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that. I mean, given the production history of the first Varan film, I can understand from a business point why they didn't really touch Varan again because that was really to make up for the co-production that fell through. But as a kaiju movie, there is definitely something in there that if it were refined a bit more and a little more time was taken out to iron out the kinks and uh, I think if Ishiro Honda had a little bit better direction over the human side of the story, then it definitely could have stood on its own. Yes, it would still be a little bit flawed, but it would definitely be uh, a a somewhat more,
Stronger, yeah.
yeah,
Because like
more
unlike
stronger movie.
54, which has like a really good story,
Yeah.
Varan is just a little bit weak in the writing, and so that kind of hurts it. But I think it's one of those weird things where I don't really blame Honda because I think they, once Godzilla happened and King Kong 33, it's like you start getting a lot of these monster movies that were coming out and they were just kind of pumping them out. And
Yeah.
I think Moran was like the victim of that as well because Honda is a great director and he's the one that did the directing. The writing just isn't there to match it like it was with Godzilla, so or even Rodan. So like, it's just too bad that it didn't have more going for it in terms of the story itself.
That's true. I mean, but the one area where, or the two areas actually that the movie excels at are Ifukube's score, which is perfect and was also re-engineered for later movies like Battle in Outer Space and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. And there's also the special effects sequences directed by E.G. Tsuburaya, which again they're just as fantastic as the sequences in Godzilla, Godzilla Raids Again, and Rodan. And Haruo Nakajima again did the suit acting of Varan in this debut film, and you can see how a lot of thought was put into the character's movements. Like it's not just another lumbering kaiju with like how Godzilla was with his
Oh,
arms up outwards. This
yep,
was a creature that walked on all fours, but also walked on its hind legs at the same time.
yep. And they did a good job with the tail whips and stuff like that
Yeah.
because it's all fluent. Like for back in the day with Suitmation, like to be able to get the like really, it's kind of funny because we talk about how great the MonsterVerse is with King of the Monsters and how each creature had its own fluidity.
Mm,
For the time, Varan has that fluidity as a Suitmation, which is amazing. It just
yeah, he
looks good.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the wire work, especially on the tail, it's perfect. Especially when it's if it's close up on the tail, like Varan just wiping out the village, you can tell that not only do they carefully plan it, but they perfectly executed that destruction. Also, the same in the Haneda airport toward the end of the film.
Yep. Yep, definitely. Definitely an underrated film. I definitely need to watch the Japanese version though, because I don't really like the American one, even though I hate subtitles usually. But in this case, I'll make the sacrifice to watch the Japanese one.
Hmm.
Well, I know that on your channel you're a short story writer and you got some plans to do some stuff. Where are you at with that on your channel and all the stories that you want to put out there?
Story wise, I've got some that are in very early stages of writing, so I'm still doing some planning. But this is coming soon, in maybe less than a few days. There's another time lapse illustration, which is really a big drawing, but it is based on my Gothic stories. So that's something I will be uploading very soon, and I hope that all of you are looking forward to it and will have something to say about it. Also, on my channel earlier last year, I did a Godzilla versus Varan stop motion, which is a two-part thing. I would like to get back into doing more of that when I have find the time, but doing this video now and how you talked about Varan in the Monsterverse, it has definitely added more to the kaiju part of storytelling. So I might just start cooking up some more ideas, especially about my boy here.
Yeah, I mean, dude, if you wrote a story on based on the Rodan stuff that we were talking about, that would be
Yeah,
fun. And like I would say, the minute you get done with it, to copyright that shit, so that if it ever gets used, you get the rights and the money for it. Because
yeah,
you and I have done this before. Like people don't understand. If anybody wants to go back to our discussion you and I had about Alien versus
AVP.
Predator. Yeah,
Yeah.
we did the same shit. We were, in
Yeah.
fact, Badlands is coming out, and they're kind of dabbling with some of the shit we were already talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm happy whenever I talk to you about anything. Whenever you and I, sometimes we're just going to sit down for an hour and just talk about rewriting movies and plots.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
usually come up with some pretty cool shit.
Yeah. Like if they do announce another AVP movie, then it must have the following. It must take place after Alien 3. No mention of Prometheus, Covenant, or as much as I
Yep.
like Romulus, I think it can just not be
It's
mentioned in that movie.
yeah.
Yeah, take place after Alien 3, take place on a distant planet, feature the Colonial Marines. Bring back the Colonial Marines. It has to happen. Come
Yep.
on, guys.
Yep. Definitely. Yep.
Yeah.
And just like this, like the Rodan and Varan matchup, I think that makes perfect sense. And the idea behind what we were talking about with the worshiping of both creatures, like that's so perfect. It's so perfectly made. It's right
Yeah.
there for you. It's right there for you.
Yeah. This is money in the ground. Come on. How come no one's picked up on this? Come on.
Money in the bank, baby. It's money
Yeah.
in the bank.
Absolutely.
For me, I don't have anything really. I mean, we have a couple of ghouls obviously next week, but I'll just talk about that when we get there. But other than that, I don't really have much the rest of the week to do. I'm going to be doing some other things outside of this. But man, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. It's a lot of fun as always.
Yeah. I like
Please
doing
go ahead.
these with you. Thank you for
No, no,
bringing me
no
on. I
problem.
like doing these little spotlights. I love them.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, we're all passionate about the kaijus, and we talk about it offline sometimes in our own private chat. So
Yeah.
we're big fans, and we always shoot the shit and come up with great stories and stuff. It's nice to get it out on video and hear other people's opinions of what we have. In fact, let us know in the chat or in the comment section. What do you think about our ideas? Would you like to see it? Would you like to see a little bit something else with the idea that we have? Please go like and subscribe to Dan Filming, the professor. He's got shit on the way coming for you all. As always, thank you again, sir, for being here. For the rest of you, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Metal Town Radio podcast.